It was the sort of thing every parent secretly dreads. But in my case, it only lasted about a week. The first time I noticed the lump, the very first of what would become hundreds, I didn't panic. I just stood there in the shower, turning my arm under the water, staring at it with a weird curiosity. It didn't scare me, it just didn't make sense. The thing looked familiar, like pieces of different things I'd seen before, all mashed together into something strange and new. It had a round, dome-like shape, kind of like a mosquito bite, only much bigger. If a mosquito bite was the size of a piece of candy, this one was more like a cookie. Its color was even stranger. It looked like a bruise that had started to heal, that wild mix of red and blue, but brighter, almost glowing. It had this angry purple shade to it, like it was alive somehow. And right on top, something shiny was poking out. A smooth, white pebble-looking thing, glistening under the bathroom light. It took me a moment to realize what it was. A tooth. I stepped out of the shower, towel in hand, careful not to touch it too hard. I patted it dry last, dabbing around it gently, scared the thing might burst if I pressed too much. I pinched it between my fingers and tried to pull the tooth out, but it wouldn't move an inch. Frustrated, I looked in the mirror. I pulled my mouth open, hooking my finger into my cheek, checking my gums, a messy mix of baby and adult teeth. I couldn't figure out which one was missing. The only explanation that made sense to me, and I was 9 years old, so it seemed logical enough, was that one of my teeth had fallen out in my sleep, hit my arm, and somehow got stuck there. Yeah, that had to be it. My arm was the stone, and the tooth was Excalibur. The idea that it might have grown there didn't even occur to me. I was losing my baby teeth, after all. Sometimes things just happen in weird ways, right? I showed it to my mom the next morning over breakfast. The look she gave me wasn't simple at all. Her lips were trembling around a half-smile, eyes glassy and wide, pupils spreading like ink on paper. It was the same look she had the morning after my grandma passed, that second before she told me the news. Maybe it wasn't that simple after all, I thought. The next few days were a blur, like falling endlessly without ever hitting the ground. My parents moved me from one place to another with this frantic energy, but they wouldn't tell me what was really wrong. Everything felt too fast, too heavy, and I just sort of shut down. My brain put up walls to keep me calm, so a lot of what happened back then comes in flashes. I remember sitting in my pediatrician's office. The walls were this mint green color, almost exactly like toothpaste. I actually caught myself wondering if I should be brushing the tooth that was growing out of my wrist. Should I brush it before my other teeth, or after? Since it wasn't in my mouth, maybe it needed extra cleaning. I never asked, but I definitely thought about it. I also remember how my mom would whisper the word oncologist. She said it the same way she whispered about maybe taking our dog for a walk, quiet, cautious, like even saying it too loud might summon something bad. It reminded me of how Emma Watson whispered Voldemort in those Harry Potter movies. And I'll never forget the day the doctor called. Mom was in the kitchen when she answered. As soon as she heard the news, it was like her body just gave out. She dropped against the counter, then slid to the floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Dad stood there stiff as a board, arms folded, his tan skin creased from years working outside. He didn't move a muscle even when Mom turned to me, hand covering the phone, her face lighting up as she repeated the word that changed everything. Benign. I had never heard that word before, but I liked it. I liked how it rolled around in my head, benign, soft and smooth like a piece of candy you didn't want to finish. But more than how it sounded, I loved what it did to Mom. For days, she'd been so tense, like her whole body was tangled in invisible barbed wire. That one word, benign, was like magic. It freed her. Dad, though, had his own kind of magic word. Or rather, two of them. Second opinion, he said. And the moment he did, I could almost see Mom's relief drain away, the invisible wire slithering back around her. I don't care what that doctor says, he argued. This is our son. He said there's a 97% chance it won't come back after they remove it. How can anyone be 97% sure of anything? Either it comes back or it doesn't. We're getting another opinion. I shrank down in my chair, trying to take up as little space as possible in our cramped little mobile home, wishing I could just disappear. We can hardly keep up with the bills we already have, my mom said sharply. Just tell me straight, Mark. What exactly are you planning? Dad leaned back in his chair and smirked. Glad you asked. Oh, there's no question about it coming back after removal. Absolutely. 100%. Not a single doubt in my mind, said Dr. Hawthorne. I tried to keep my arm extended as the man in the dark three-piece suit and bolo tie leaned in close, sweat dripping down his pale face. The stool under him let out a high-pitched squeal as his weight shifted, and I immediately jerked my arm back like a folding knife snapping shut. From the start, Dad's second opinion felt wrong. First off, the doctor, Hawthorne, told us to call him by his first name. No doctor at all. Second, his office wasn't an office at all. It was a room inside his huge old mansion. There were no posters of anatomy, no crinkly paper gowns, no steel exam tables. I sat in a creaky wooden chair in my jeans and t-shirt, surrounded by walls crammed with weird, witchy things, butterflies pinned in clear resin, brightly dyed plants drooping from strange pots, shiny crystals scattered like dice, tarot cards stapled right onto the walls with painted runes swirling over them. And yet, despite all that, the worst part might have been the gloves. He wore those thin, sterile medical gloves like a real doctor would, and for a split second, that gave me some comfort, something familiar in this strange place. But then I saw his fingernails. Long, yellowed, cracked things, speckled with what looked like ringworm, pressing right through the glove's fingertips. By the time he finished poking and pressing at the lump on my wrist, several nails had punctured through completely. When his nails scraped my skin, a wave of nausea rolled through me. The physician you first saw wasn't completely wrong, Hawthorne said, peeling the ruined gloves off his sweaty hands and stuffing them into his pocket. Definitely a teratoma, a germ cell tumor that can turn into all sorts of tissues. Teeth, hair, fat, bone. I'll cut the list there. No need to give anyone nightmares. Then he winked at me. I think he was trying to seem friendly or light-hearted, but it had the opposite effect. I wanted to shrink out of his gaze. His eyes were small, black, and far apart, like two dots drawn on a blank sheet of paper, and the longer he looked at me, the dirtier I felt, like a layer of ash or grease was coating my skin. Doesn't that mean it's malignant? My mom asked, her voice dropping low on that last word. Hawthorne shook his head and mopped his enormous forehead with a yellow handkerchief. No, ma'am. Not malignant. I would call it recurrent, not malignant. Recurrent means it will probably come back, yes, but malignant means it would come back and he stopped himself, biting off the last syllable. He'd been too honest. But I knew what he meant. I wasn't a baby. Kill. Forgive me, he said, his voice softer. I have not treated a child in years. I used to, but pediatrics became a little too painful for me after, well, never mind. The point is this, despite what your previous doctor said, the teratoma will grow again eventually. It should be removed, not because it is malignant, but because letting it get large would be, frankly, upsetting for your boy. I am glad your husband called me. I know money is tight. Please, do not let the cost weigh on you. I did not become a physician to bankrupt families. We will work out an income-based payment plan. Any questions can go to my assistant, Deborah. She knows more about the numbers than I do. He led us out of the cluttered room, through a long, echoing hallway, and onto the back patio. An older woman sat at a small cast-iron table, her back to us, stirring a cup of black tea with a tiny spoon. I could picture how beautiful this garden must have been once, but now it was a graveyard of forgotten things. Flower beds rotted into piles of dead stems and fungus. A cherub statue stood over a dry fountain, one arm gone, its face worn down to nothing. Pennies lined the basin like a strange constellation of old wishes no one remembered making. A child's bicycle was half swallowed by weeds. Farther back, a treehouse sagged, looking ready to collapse. Hawthorne waved us closer. Mom and I sat across from the woman. At first, she scowled, as though we'd stolen her seats. But then she saw me, and the anger melted into something else. It was almost joy, but sharper. Hungrier. She smiled at me, her lipstick leaving red smudges across her teeth. And unlike her husband, whose eyes were too small and far apart, hers were huge, dry, white orbs crowding their sockets, leaving barely any room for color. And she never stopped staring at me. Not even when she spoke directly to my mom. Deborah, could you explain the payment plan to these good people? Hawthorne asked as he headed back inside, letting the screen door snap behind him. Through the glass, he kept looking at me, too, though his eyes were different from hers. His expression was distant. Sad, almost. In a move that only made sense to a kid, I shut my eyes, curled up in my chair, and pretended to be asleep. I even threw in a few exaggerated snores, hoping that if I looked harmless enough, they would both stop staring at me. Eventually, I felt my mom lift me into her arms and carry me out to the car. That was your second opinion? She hissed at my dad the second we pulled up at home. I could tell a storm was brewing between them, so I slipped away quietly. I ran down the narrow hallway of our trailer, shut myself in my room, crawled under the blanket, and started flicking at that damn tooth on my wrist. I hated it. God, I hated it. I just wanted it gone, wanted it to leave me alone. Later that same week, we went back to the regular doctor, the real one, the oncologist. They put me under, soft and slow, and when I woke up, the thing had been cut out. 3 weeks later, though, another lump had taken its place. Same size. Same spot. Turns out, Dr. Hawthorne had been right all along. This one was different, though. No tooth. The skin was smoother, rounder. But at the edges, there were these fine little hairs, soft, brownish ones. If I had to guess, I'd say they looked like eyelashes. I tried not to think about it. The next 10 years, believe it or not, were mostly quiet. After a while, the whole tumor situation just became part of my routine. Within a year, it barely even fazed me anymore. The human mind really is something strange. It can normalize anything if you give it enough time. Sometimes the lump took weeks to come back. Other times, only a few days. But it always came back. Mom would call Deborah, that weird assistant of Hawthorne's, to set up an appointment, and without fail, she'd answer on the first ring. I could almost picture her sitting on that same patio, teacup in hand, staring out over that dead, overgrown garden, waiting for us to call. Oddly enough, no matter how many times they cut into my wrist, it never scarred. Hawthorne said it was because of some special powder he used before cutting, a bright orange dust that smelled floral, almost like citrus and coriander mixed together. I never liked to watch. While he worked, I'd let my eyes wander around the room instead, studying all those strange trinkets and crystals. Say what you want about the man, but he was efficient, 5 minutes flat, and it was done. I'd feel nothing, just a little pressure, and then it was over. He'd drop the new tumor into a glass jar, hand it off to Deborah, and she'd carry it away. I always wanted to ask what they did with them afterward. I never did. Before I left each time, Hawthorne gave me the same warning. If it ever turns black, he'd say, from purple to black, you come here immediately. Do not call ahead. Do not stop anywhere. Just drive straight to me, day or night. Fair enough, I thought. My teenage years came and went faster than I expected. Not long after I was diagnosed, Dad got promoted, and then promoted again. We left the trailer park behind and moved into a decent one-story house across town. The money problems vanished. Aside from the occasional growth, I was perfectly fine. Well, mostly. My eyesight started to blur a bit. Nothing serious, just enough that the world looked a little foggy sometimes, like I was seeing through thin smoke. By the time I started high school, I had to sit closer to the board to make out what was written. Doctors couldn't find anything wrong. My eyes, they said, were fine. One ophthalmologist suggested it might be floaters, those little specks that drift across your vision when you get older, except mine didn't move. They were like cracks or cobwebs stuck over everything I looked at. But, like with everything else, I adapted. I learned to live with it. Sit in the front, problem solved. No big deal. Now I'm 19. Still living at home. Going to a small community college nearby. I wanted to apply to Columbia, but Dad wouldn't hear of it. It's too far from Hawthorne, he said. I wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea of staying home, especially sleeping on the same mattress I had since I was a kid, but Dad was paying for everything, no loans, no conditions. Hard to argue with free college. And, truth be told, life had been good. Quietly, suspiciously good. But peace like that never lasts. It's a trap. The calm before the fall. Because last night, around midnight, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. I flipped on the light, and there it was. Another tumor, right under my wrist. I was due for one anyway. But this one was black. Black as tar. Black as death. Black like my mom's pupils the first time she saw the original lump. I panicked. Didn't even think to wake my parents. I had my license now, so I grabbed my keys, ran out the door, and drove to Hawthorne's mansion as fast as I could. I followed his old instructions exactly. No stops. No calls. No hesitation. The moment he opened the front door, I knew something was wrong. He grabbed my shoulder with a heavy hand and pulled me inside. Even in the dim light, I could see fear in his eyes. Real fear. And then he said something, a phrase that's been echoing in my head ever since. It hit like a spell, like words that could physically change the air. As we climbed the stairs, I could feel it, that invisible barbed wire curling around my legs again. The temperature dropped with every step. The higher we went, the colder it got, until his breath came out in visible puffs of white against the dark. I've been meaning to show you my son's old room, Dr. Whitaker murmured. I kicked, twisted, and tried to pry myself out of his grip, but he was far too strong for me. Then, out of the darkness, I saw them, two pale, waxy orbs of white, familiar and glistening like wet jelly. Daphne leaned in close. She opened her hand right in front of my face and blew. Whatever she held drifted into my lungs, a cloud of sweet-smelling powder like crushed flowers and sugar. Everything around me folded inward. My vision dimmed to the same blackness as the tumor, and then it was gone. Voices pressed through the heavy sedation like distant whispers under water. At first they were garbled nonsense, syllables melting together, collapsing into meaningless sound. Then, suddenly, they sharpened mid-sentence. Not my intent, Whitaker. You're a patient and gentle man. You wanted to protect the boy. You wanted to spare him as much pain as possible. It was moral, noble, even. Other noises rose into focus. Glass clinking. Footsteps hurrying across wooden floors. The faint snapping of keys being pressed on some kind of keyboard. I would appreciate it if you did not patronize me, Daphne, Dr. Whitaker shot back. The dark haze began to clear. My vision came into focus. An icy draft snaked up my bare skin. Except for my boxers, I was naked. I'm not patronizing you, Daphne replied coolly. I'm saying we both knew this could happen, and yet you still chose to put this boy's life above David's. If we pulled the meat slowly, we risked it turning rotten. You knew that. Now look at us. I was in a bedroom, lashed to a chair with what looked like improvised restraints, Ethernet cables looped and knotted around my torso, coarse twine cutting into my wrists and ankles. A single dim light bulb swung from the ceiling, painting the room in a sickly yellow glow. Peeling band posters clung to the walls. Little League trophies and framed photos lined the shelves. In some of those photos stood Daphne, Whitaker, and a young boy I didn't recognize. Except, he looked like me. Not identical, but frighteningly close. Like seeing a younger version of myself through a warped mirror. At a cluttered desk, they worked in silence. Daphne ground seeds in a mortar and pestle. Whitaker scribbled furiously on a notepad, muttering under his breath and occasionally tapping his dirty nails against a calculator. An empty beaker sat in the middle of the desk surrounded by an apothecary's nightmare, petals sealed in glass tubes, jars of pickled meat, containers of live insects, steaming liquids in mismatched teacups. Across the room stood a bed. The navy blue comforter bulged over something lying underneath. Whatever it was, it did not move in any way that could be called human. The surface swelled and bubbled like soda fizzing over ice. Under the bed, freezer-like machines hummed a low growl. A scream built in my throat. My eyes shot to the ceiling above the bed, and my heart stopped. The pattern. Lines. Cracks. Cobwebs. The same pattern that had haunted my vision for years. I unleashed a scream so raw it tore my throat. They barely reacted. Daphne, go to the garden. We need more powder for him. She smacked the back of his head. There is no time, she barked. He hesitated, then bent back over his notepad. I wailed until my voice was shredded, but deep down, I knew what they knew. No one was anywhere near this mansion to hear me. Eventually, I fell silent, trembling. Whitaker tossed his pencil aside like a student done with a test. 6.5. 6.5 should give us enough expansion to harvest the remaining 20 grams we need for David's renewal before it spoils. Probably will not be fatal, either, he said flatly. Without speaking, Daphne poured saline into the empty beaker. Whitaker unscrewed a jar filled with what looked like translucent crimson marbles, each with a tiny silver cross glinting at its core. He picked up a small tuning rod and flicked it. Two sharp, dissonant notes rang out. He stroked one marble along the rod until the metal stopped vibrating and the marble began to hum on its own. When he dropped it into the saline, it spun around the rim of the glass by itself. 6.5 marbles later, their grotesque alchemy was ready. When they sliced the 7th marble in half with a butcher's knife, it let out a shriek so high-pitched it made my teeth ache. I wish I had just closed my eyes. Daphne yanked the comforter off the bed. Whitaker stepped toward me, the beaker in his hands. Underneath the blanket was a giant wooden mold, shaped like a person lying on its back, like a cookie cutter designed for human beings. It was nearly full. Just missing a bit at the top. Inside it churned a cauldron of teeth, fat, hair, and bone, kept fresh and cold by the machines below. And it had all come from me. Whitaker crouched down and set the beaker at my feet. He hooked a fingernail under my chin and tilted my face up until I met his dark, pinprick eyes. I want you to know that I am truly sorry, he whispered. Then he nudged the glass under me. What happened next is burned into my brain. Tumors burst from my skin like budding flowers, my belly, the back of my neck, my foot, between my shoulder blades, everywhere. My flesh stretched, split. The taste of blood filled my mouth. Daphne snipped at me with garden shears. Whitaker carved with a scalpel. Chunks of me plopped wetly into a bucket beside the chair. When they finally had enough, Whitaker pulled the beaker away. My body sagged and went cold. Daphne calmly poured the contents of the bucket into the mold. David was finished. They had even managed to scrape a little more of me than they needed, I think. Everything tilted and spun like I was on a carousel. I heard Daphne's voice, low and uncertain. Do you think David will understand all of this? Do you think he's going to like his new body? From somewhere in the room, Dr. Whitaker appeared holding a chunk of dark red meat, still coated in frost. A heart, maybe. He pressed it into the wooden mold. Of course he will, Whitaker said, striking a match with his thumb. He's our son. He tossed the match onto what had once been me. The mold ignited instantly, a strange silver flame bursting upward like liquid metal on fire. From inside the mercury-colored blaze came a moan, deep and guttural, a sound no living throat should ever make. Something rose from that fire, a shape, a figure, though mercifully, before my mind could fully grasp what I was seeing, the darkness closed over me once again. When I came to, I was still in the same room, sitting in the same chair. But now my wrists and ankles were free. My wounds had been roughly stitched closed. And 4 line ran into my arm. Above me, the last drops of blood crept down through the tubing into my vein. It looked like I had already gone through 2 other transfusions judging from the empty bag swaying on the pole beside me. My clothes were folded neatly under the chair. My phone lay on top, battery full as if nothing had happened. It was like being hit with a taser. I lurched out of the chair, trembling, crying, pacing, clawing at my own arms, muttering nonsense under my breath. After a while, when the shock finally began to loosen its grip, I managed to dress myself, flip open my phone, and almost make a call. I was 1 thumb press away from calling my dad when the realization started to click inside my head like tumblers in a lock. A truth too grotesque to accept. I scanned the room. All the alchemical supplies were gone. The old posters, the trophies, the photographs, they had vanished too. Only one thing remained, the wooden mold. It was empty now, save for a thin sprinkle of silver ash. I bolted home. I prayed. I begged. I wished to every god I could name that I would not find what I feared I would find. No one was home when I arrived, both my parents were at work. I charged through the front door, up the stairs, down the hall, and into my bedroom. I thumped my fist against the bed frame. Hollow. Sure. But that did not prove anything. I ran my fingers along the oak slats. Nothing. Smooth. Featureless. There's no way, I muttered. There's just no way. Dad worked hard. He got promoted. That's all it is. My bed was pushed up against the wall. One side still hidden from view. The frame let out a screech as I dragged it, like it was begging me not to. I felt one of the sutures on my stomach tear open from the effort, but it only fueled me, sharpened my focus. Halfway along the exposed side, my eyes caught a faint slit in the wood. I pressed on it, and a concealed panel clicked open. I lifted my phone, its flashlight beam cutting through the dark space. There it was. A small glass of saline. Inside, a single red marble spun, slowly, endlessly, right under the place where my head rested every night. Spinning. 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 And when I squinted, when I really concentrated, I could see an image overlaying the world in front of me. But this time it was not static. No lines, no cracks, no cobwebs. The picture moved, shifting and changing like a living thing. A window. A window into David's eyes. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my bones, that it was a window I would never be able to shut.